Okay, thank you, Sebastian, for introducing me. So I would really like to get started fast, and because we want to develop an app fast. So let's just hop into the agenda. First of all, I'm of course going to give you a little background as to what Vue.js is actually, in case somebody here didn't catch that so far. Then we're going to talk about why Vue.js is cool, then how you can get set up. From there, I will demonstrate a few things that Vue can do. From that, we will dive into components, what they are and why they are super important if you're developing Vue.js or in any other front-end framework. After that, we are going to take a quick dive into Vuetify.js, and using Vuetify.js, we will build a small to-do list app. And after that, you can, of course, ask all the questions that might arise in the meantime. It's a framework for building user interfaces. It is designed from the ground up to be incrementally adoptable. So what does that mean exactly? So first of all, it's a framework for building user interfaces. I think one should differentiate that a little further. It's a framework for building web-based user interfaces, and that of course means it's built in and for JavaScript. Vue itself primarily deals with anything that's more on the side of looks and feel of your application and less on the business logic side. And of course, as it's a framework, it provides you with a way to think about the user interface you're creating. More on that later. It's progressive. Now, what does progressive actually mean? It ties in a lot with the incrementally adoptable part of the definition. Because Vue itself, just the core library, is not a one-stop shop for your entire app. Like, for example, Angular, which gives you almost anything that you need to build a full-blown application out of the box. But, however, you can easily build an app using the surrounding ecosystem of Vue. The philosophy you will see here is a lot about you don't have to use any of the things we provide you with, but every problem that you might encounter, we already have a solution for. So, why is Vue.js cool? So, first of all, one of the major selling points for me is it's easy to learn. So, the API is comprehensible and very intuitive once you get the core concepts. The documentation is phenomenal. I've never seen a framework or library being that well documented, and there's lots of good tutorials and guides out there. So lots of tutorials and guides counts for a lot of frameworks, but those are actually good. If you look at the Vue.js webpage on vue.js.org, you actually find a navigation section here that says Learn, which includes the documentation, which has a guide, and of course the API reference, a style guide, which gives you some insights into how to write good Vue code, some examples, a cookbook, and also video courses. So the Vue Mastery course is actually being produced by the inventor of Vue himself. And then there's Vue School, which I guess does the same thing. I haven't looked too closely into it, if I'm being honest. However, you don't need to invest into these video courses. The guide is definitely enough to get you started. And today I'm also going to show you how to get started. So, that was the last slide, sorry. Yeah, another thing that's very cool, even though I was just telling you that most of the components are opt-in, still, Vue does a lot of the UI stuff out of the box. We will see that once we start coding. And it scales. That's another major selling point for me, whether you're just doing one tiny thing on a web page. For example, I had a static web page and I implemented an image gallery with like 15 lines of code. You just throw in Vue.js via the CDN and write some code and you get a gallery. Or if you go to the other extreme, you can build a full-blown app, including server-side rendering for faster web pages and search engine optimization. You get a router. If you don't know exactly what a router is, if you have different views in your app, so like for example a profile page and a dashboard and a settings page, then handling all that becomes a little tricky, and that's what routers are for. Also, if you've ever dealt with larger UI applications, you know that state is kind of hard to handle. And for that, we have Vuex, which is a little bit like Redux if you're coming from the React side of things. All that and more is included in the Next.js framework, which, yes, is a framework built on top of the Vue.js frameworks. So that's what we web people do. If you're planning on building like something big, definitely check out Next. Okay, so if you are a little bit like me, you're kind of feeling like this right now, you just want to get building. And in fact, I will now tell you how to get set up for Vue development, and then we are going to dive straight into the code. So, what do we need? We just need to install, in the traditional sense, one thing, and that is Node.js. I won't be going through that for now because I'm afraid it will bore you, and I trust in your abilities to use search engines. With Node.js comes npm, which is the primary package manager for the JavaScript ecosystem in general. And if you don't know what a package manager is there anybody who doesn't know? Okay, cool. Then we can skip that. We just use npm to install the Vue CLI. And the Vue CLI, of course, is the command line interface that is provided by the Vue ecosystem, which gets you up and running really fast if you want to build a Vue app. So to make things even more comfortable, you don't even have to use the CLI per se. You can just execute one command from the CLI, and that is Vue UI. What this will do, kind of funny actually, it will launch a graphical user interface for your command line interface. So if we go to the home page of this interface, we get the Vue project manager, which allows you to import, manage, or create new projects. And of course, today we want to just create a new project. We select the path where we want the project to be. We create a new project. We type in a name for the project, which in this case is My Cool App. We get some additional settings. Those are not too important. What's really cool is this command line interface is also integrated with Git, so it does a lot of the Git stuff for you, for example, setting up the repository. So for the initial commit message, we can just choose setup using Vue CLI. Then we go next. Then there's presets and configuration for your app, of course. Today we're just going to use the default preset. You can manually select the features that you want. For example, you can include something like Vue Router or Vuex from the get-go if you choose the manual setup. Or you can also use remote presets, which is essentially just people preparing configurations for you, and you can reuse them by simply entering the URL of the Git repository. So I would actually click Create Project now, but since I don't trust other people's Wi-Fi, I'm not going to do that. Because, of course, in the background, it's going to download the dependencies for the project. Instead, I will just go to my prepared project, and this is also where you would end up after you click Create Project and the loading animations have completed. So in here, there's a lot of stuff. You even have a dashboard where you can put custom dash items on, but the main focus for now is the tasks category. In the tasks tab, we have an explorer for tasks, which are just scripts or jobs we can run around our project. For example, Surf in this case will get us a development environment up and running. Build will of course build the project for production. If you're familiar with the Node ecosystem, this thing essentially just reflects the scripts part of package.json. So we just want to get up and running, so we select the serve task, and then we just run it and look at the output. This is what you would see on the console if you were to run this command in the command line instead of using the graphical user interface. And here we get a link that we can click and voila. Oh, that's a little much. Let me just go back. I'm kind of spoiling you right here. Okay, right. This is where we want it to be actually. This looks a lot like some boilerplate default content that you would get from a scaffolding tool like the Vue CLI. And so now we will just dive into the code. So one thing that's kind of iffy about scaffolding tools, sometimes they just dump so much stuff into your source directory and you're like, okay, that's nice. I have no fucking clue what's going on here. Not so much with Vue CLI because it just takes a lot out of your source directory. And all we actually have here that is important is in the public folder, we have this index.html, which is just a tiny little HTML document. And as you can see in the body, there's, besides the no script tag, there's just one little div with the ID app. And now the question arises, how does this document end up looking like that? Well, let's take a look at the entry point of our JavaScript, which is main.js. Everything that's happening here is we're importing Vue, we're importing app, which is a Vue component. We're configuring Vue a little bit, and then we create a Vue instance using the Vue constructor. One important thing here is if you're building applications with Vue, that's actually all you're doing. You're writing this one argument for the Vue constructor, which is an object, which will then result in a configured Vue instance to be returned, and that does all the stuff in your application. So this Vue instance is rather boring. It only renders the app component essentially. So let's look at app.vue. Okay, this looks a little more interesting. So we have a template up here, which is just containing some HTML. There's, for example, an image tag. So this file, if we look at it, looks a lot like the image here. And then we get another tag, which is kind of interesting, hello world. If you know HTML, of course, HTML doesn't have a hello world tag. That is because this is another application, another component. So let's look at this hello world component. Well, that might be the source of what we see on the right side. For example, we see installed CLI plugins here, and we see installed CLI plugins over there. So let's just try something like hello log passo. Save that. Boom. That's how fast you can see your changes when developing using Vue with hot loading. Okay, so, but instead of further investigating this dummy content essentially, let's build something on our own. I will just rip out everything related to the hello world component, and we can start off with a blank slate. Okay, let's just focus that really quick. Okay, so what I want to do as a first example is we're going to implement a tiny little social media upvote downvote thingy. And first of all, we of course need to remember the amount of likes or dislikes that we have. So we provide this object, which, by the way, this is the object which will then be passed to the Vue instance. That's what I was talking about earlier. We will provide this Vue instance with some data. data is a function that's kind of quirky, don't worry too much about it. And in the data, we have likes. And of course, we start out at 0 likes. And we also want to see the amount of likes in the UI. So we use 2 curly braces up here. And here we go. We have the 0 from our data being displayed in the user interface. So let's just wrap this real quick on heading so we can see it a little better. Now, likes aren't much without a like button. So let's just add a button. Okay, we can click the button, but it doesn't do anything. Why? Because we have no method of mutating the data of our instance. So we need to add methods to our Vue instance. And the one method that I would like to implement now is the like method, which does nothing much but increase this.likes by 1. So now we have a method of doing that, but the button doesn't know that this is his method. So let's give him that information. The vOn directive here, so if I'm talking about directives, I usually mean those kind of attribute-looking things up there. If I have vOn, that's just telling Vue, okay, we want to use a Vue method or one that we implemented to listen to this event. And now if I click here, I can increase the amount of likes. Okay. But since we are on Facebook, we also want dislikes on our social media platform. And to modify or to add dislikes, we of course also need a dislike function, which increases the dislikes. And we also need to show the dislikes. And of course, we also need a dislike button, which in turn triggers the dislike method. So this works as expected, I guess. Since we want to be able to visually distinguish those two numbers, let's just use some good old HTML and JavaScript to color these numbers. Dislikes up here, and likes above. And down here we have a style section in our component file, which we will use to inject some styling. Color green for the likes and color red for the dislikes. Now, I'm not quite sure, likes and dislikes. Okay, forget the S down here. Right, so that's how easy styling our components is. So, likes and dislikes on their own are also a little boring. We want to calculate a score based off dislikes and likes. And we want a little more exciting score, so we weigh dislikes twice as much as likes. So the generic approach here would of course be, okay, we have another attribute, and in our method we also modify this data attribute. But that behavior or that approach doesn't really scale, especially if your components get a little more complex. But this score can entirely be computed off of what we get in data. And therefore, we add a computed property to our Vue instance. We call it score. It, of course, has to be a function because it's being computed. And it returns this.likes minus 2 times this.dislikes. And once again, we need to show it or show the score somewhere. Right? And if I click like here now, I also increase the score. But if I click dislike, I also remove from the score. Okay, so that's a bunch of stuff that you can do. One more thing. Whenever the state changes, I now want to update the title in the browser. So the title of my document or the web page is the little string that's being displayed up here in the tab. And so I could, of course, also now go ahead and just do that in the computed method, but that would make computed have side effects, and that's not exactly what it's intended for. So instead, what we do, we just watch the score. This function here, watch, will be triggered whenever score changes. And what do we want to do? We want to set document.title to this.score, and still want to identify our app, so my cool app goes after that. Save that, here we go. And now, as we can see, the title updates accordingly. So those are the few cool things about Vue.js that I wanted to show you. Now, where's my presentation? Oh, there it is. Whoop. And at this point, I want to introduce a small analogy into this talk, and that is that of the Vue instance being kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You just get a lot of tiny tools that you can use whenever you need them. The tools that we've seen now are data, or you can think about it like state in React components, computed properties, which are kind of an enhancement for data and state, methods, which allow us to attach behavior to our components, event handling. It was super easy to attach this event listener to the buttons, if you recall, and watchers, which allow us to react programmatically to any changes in data or computed properties. So I might have confused you at some points because I was talking about component or components without really telling you what components are. And for that, I want to take a small step back and show you this statement. Learning to code is learning to think. Now, I couldn't really find out who exactly said that. If somebody knows, please let me know after the talk. However, this statement leads me to something else. Learning Vue.js teaches us a way to think about user interfaces. We're thinking about them when we are building them. And at the heart of this thinking are UI components. So what exactly do I mean by UI components? At this point, because everybody knew what a package manager is, do you want to see this explanation? Yes? No? Somebody? Yes? Okay, right. So what do I mean by components? Let's just look at the user interface that we were using for Vue CLI. I will take a small screenshot here. Essentially, we dissect our app. So essentially what's being displayed inside, inside the browser, which is our entire app, into smaller pieces. For example, we have this sidebar here, which is one component, one part of the UI. Then on the other side of the sidebar, we have what we could call main content. And the main content, in turn, is split up into this task browser, which, of course, contains the search bar and a list of tasks. And over here, we put everything together that's related to the task itself. This thing has a header which remains constant regardless of what I select on the right. And inside the header, we have a button. Inside the button, we have an icon and some text. Now, all of these parts are components, and that is also kind of how Vue thinks about components, and therefore how you think about components when you're building user interfaces. One thing to note here, of course, is that these components are arranged or organized in a hierarchy. So going from our screenshot on the left, we just arrived at the hierarchy on the right with app, sidebar, main, and main containing task, containing a header, containing a button, which in turn contains an icon, and the run task text. Just a second. Now, why are components a good idea? As everywhere in software development, the separation of concerns or the single responsibility principle are a good thing, and UI components do a very good job at facilitating that. It enables us to write code that's more reusable, and it allows us to create user interfaces that are more consistent, because I only have to code the button once and it will look the same all out throughout the project, which in turn will give us better libraries and less spaghetti code. What then are components made of, or what are components concerned? Well, in Vue.js, they are concerned with the three major dimensions that we have in every web application. That is structure, which is done using HTML, style, done in CSS, and behavior, JavaScript. And that reflects onto these Vue component files that we were just seeing, where we have one part of the file for each of these aspects. Another thing I would like to mention here is you don't have to use Vue component files, especially not in this sense. You can also put away the template into separate files, or have the CSS in separate files, or have global style sheets, whatever. Whatever fits your need. Once again, everything is opt-in, and you can just plug it together. So at this point, you might be a little annoyed because I'm still not building an app, which is what I was initially promising for this talk. And you wanted to see a fast way to build an app. And now you just know that you have to write a lot of components, and making good-looking components is hard. And making components that look together is even harder. And yeah, after all, I was saying I was going to build an app, but I've got another thing up my sleeve, and that is Vue.js component libraries, or in this case specifically Vuetify. So what is Vuetify? Let's just take a look at the website. That's always a good idea. That a component library for Vue.js, and essentially it contains everything that you might need to build your UI or app, from buttons to checkboxes to text fields, and all of them look good, and they all of them look good if you combine them. That is because Vuetify adheres to the material design guidelines proposed by Google. There's literally components in these frameworks I didn't know I needed for my app. So unless you're drawing graphs or something, it's probably got something for you. So obviously, to build our app, we want to use Vuetify, and now we need to add it to No, I don't. Because Vue CLI even enables us to just add stuff after we've created the project. And in this case, I of course want to add Vuetify. Oh, let's hope this runs through. Take a while. Dun, 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 dun. Here we go. So this, of course, you can also configure a little bit, but that's not too important. And then I would usually click Finish Installation, get a loading animation, but once again, I don't trust people's Wi-Fi. So I will just stop this one and go to the other project, which I already prepared, and run this one instead. Let's close that off. Right, here we go. Oops. Okay, sorry, it's still building. This, of course, now takes a few seconds because we have the entire component library attached. Right, and so that is what our boilerplate looks like when we're using Vuetify. All right then, now coding time. As promised, we are going to very quickly build a small to-do app. And to do that, first of all, I will have to replace the Hello World component with my own component. So we will create a to-do list.vue. that to-do list needs a template and some scripting, of course. Now we can leave a message here so we know what we are doing. Hello, LOG. And over here, we just have to, instead of hello world, use the to-do list everywhere. Save that. We'll reload. Whoops, okay. What did I break? Yes, rookie mistake there. I cannot include raw text as the only template. Here we go. So I want a to-do list, and a list, of course, contains data. So once again, we need data. And this data consists of items, and for now, these items will just be an apple and a banana. So how do I display those items properly? Well, we want to display a list, so it might make sense to just use a vlist. And inside the list, we have, of course, list items. So it might make sense to just use list items for that. Now, we have multiple list items depending on our data, and Vue gives us a very elegant mechanism for that, which is just we add the directive v4 equals item and index in items. Then we need a key. This is not too important, but I need to do it, otherwise the compiler is going to blow up. Right. And now we just have kind of a UI element loop in which we can work with the item and index variable. So let me just close off the list. And here we go. We have an apple and a banana. Close enough. So it's not a to-do list if I cannot tick off items. So first of all, I also need to remember in my state or in my data whether the item is checked. So we just turn that into an object, give it a title, then we add an attribute checked, which by default, of course, is false. And now that doesn't look too good. I mean, someone like us could probably read it, but it still doesn't look good. So instead of just printing out item, let's separate the list further into a vlist item content, which instead of the item itself will just contain the item.title. And here we go, close off the title. And we also have something that we can do with those list items, and that is, of course, a list item action. In case somebody is a little confused, those are, of course, all Vuetify components that I'm using here. So in the action, we have the a checkbox. And that now looks a lot more like a to-do list than what we had before. So I can already click those checkboxes and they are responding, but in fact, they aren't mutating the data of my Vue instance. So what I will my array of items, and here we go. There's checked, which is false in both cases, and if I click here, nothing changes about my data. So what I need to do here is tell the checkbox that it belongs to this checked attribute. And now you can see the Boolean changing down here when I'm ticking the box. I can also do that from here, actually. So the Vue dev tools are really kind of a must-have if you want to develop Vue.js or debug Vue.js, which you will have to. Okay, so we have a list on which we can tick off items. What we don't have now is a way to add items from the user interface. So let's just add another item. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. And this item, instead of being an actual item, will just be, will just contain a text field. And let's close off the content. And of course, this item has an action. Sorry. And this time, the action is not a checkbox, but it's a button. And what does the button say? Of course, add item. And we need to close off the action, I think. Yes. Okay. Seems like I broke something. Yes. I need to move that up here. Here we go. Looks better. Okay, so one thing that's annoying here is the button is kind of large. I don't like that. So let's just make the button small. Better. Okay. Now I can type into this text field and click the button, but of course it doesn't do anything. So we will have to first of all remember what's being typed into this text field and bind that to our data. vModel equals new item. And then we need to tell the button to actually add something or to actually do something. Oh, okay. Then we need to tell, well, we need a method, of course, to add an item like we did with the dislikes. And this method is just going to push to our items, this.items.push, an object which once again has a title, which is this.newItem, and is of course not checked because we have just added it. And for convenience, we will clear up the new item text line and just set it to an empty string. The button, of course, needs to know what to do once he's clicked. We just use vOnClick for that, like we did with the likes and the add item method. And in case I did everything correctly, I can now add a key. Okay, seems like I didn't do everything correctly. Where did I go wrong? vOnClick add item. Okay, sometimes you just have to reload. Might be the case, might not be. Yes, I just had to reload. So, yeah, if that isn't a full-blown to-do list, I don't know what is. So, one last thing I would like to change about about the thing is, especially looking at the template part, this entire component has become rather large. So now I will show you how you can essentially split up the functionality into different components and how components can communicate with one another. So we will just create a new file once again, which in this case we are going to name newItem.vue. This component, of course, also has a template and a script. And the cool thing here is we can just use the template that we created over here, move it there. Then we need to tell our to-do list component that it's using another component. So we first of all import the component from /new item. Then we need to tell the Vue instance that it's using this component. Components, new item, all we gotta do. And then we can just go here and place the new item component here. So that's not all of it, of course. We got a bunch of problems. First of all, the new item where we have the text field no longer has access to the items array, for example. So we need to somehow let the to-do list know whenever somebody is clicking the button in the new item component. And we will do that by, first of all, also implementing an addItem method in the new item components. New addItem. And instead of mutating some state, we are going to use a Vue feature, which is every Vue instance is also an event bus. So we can just emit events from there. We name the event new item. And what do we pass there? Well, what's in the text field, but that needs to be in data first. Forgot about that. Okay. New item. Oh, we could just copy that over from here. Whoop. That looks bad. Right. So that is fixed, and we just pass this.addItem to the event, and we also clear up our text line here. Got a comma. Right, and now instead of, because we don't have the button in the to-do list component anymore, we now need to listen for the new item event on our custom component. And this we're going to do using the addItem method. So addItem kind of serves like a callback for the event that's being fired, and it will receive this.addItem from the other component as its argument. So we can just add new item to the argument and remove this over here.
Not add item, it should be.
Ah, yes, this.new item. Thank you very much. Yes, I was throwing functions around. Thanks. Okay. Kiwi. Here we go. So this is one way of communicating data between components. Specifically the events up part. Now we're going to do one last tiny thing, and that is I want a placeholder in my text field that also contains the information of how many items are already in the list. So to the text field, we are going to add a placeholder. And because this is dynamically, we have to rebind it. So rebind in front of an attribute tells Vue, hey, please evaluate what's inside this attribute and pass that to the component instead of what's actually written there. So we will just write add to your list of plus item count plus components. Not components, items, sorry. Getting a little caught up here. Now, this component does not yet know what item count is. It will receive that as a prop. So we go props item count. To name that's a string, sorry. And the to-do list has to pass to the new item component what the item count is. So we bind item count items dot length. here we go. Add to your list of 3 items. And now if I add a tomato, it's a list of 4 items. Okay, so we've added a few things to our Swiss Army knife. Custom events, props, and most importantly, we know a few ways of how to compose components. That means using components together. If you look further under the hood of Vue.js and the surrounding ecosystem, you will quickly find that your Swiss Army knife looks more like this guy. So just to give you a few examples, there's lifecycle hooks, which allow you to do things when your component is being removed or added to your to the DOM or to the UI. Then there's built-in prop validation, the thing that I just showed you. Props, passing data down, becomes important when you have libraries. And prop validation gives us a way to ensure that whoever is using our component is giving us correct props or props that we can work with. We have slots, which are just a different way of composing components. So essentially, you can just go ahead and say, hey, I don't care what components are inside of this component. Just give me anything and give it to me in the right place. Then there's transitions. Vue has a few very nice mechanisms to do things like CSS transitions and animations. It's not much what it's doing, but you would have to do it a lot of times. Custom directives, so the v-on for event handling and the v-bind for evaluating expressions in the template are directives, and you can implement custom ones if you want to. Then there's mixins, which give each and every component in your application access to some object or value, which might come in handy at some point. Watchers, we covered that actually, and there's a lot more. So if you're interested, just head over to the guide. And yeah, now it's time for your questions, please. Okay, thank you for listening.